Albert Breer, senior writer for the MMQB. Albert, I know you're down at the Kyler Murray Invitational, better known as the NFL Combine, but is
Yeah.
he like the biggest story that you've seen down there, Albert, in the last couple of years in terms of kind of the hype machine? I feel like he's the only name we know almost in this draft.
Well, maybe outside of his teammate last year, right? I mean,
Right.
I don't know. It's a pretty good run for Lincoln Ryan in the last couple of years. Yeah, I mean, I think he's fascinating. He's fascinating in so many ways. Here's what it is, Cook. And I think this is my favorite part of the whole thing. In my first year covering the league, I covered Doug Flutie. He was a backup in New England,
Right.
behind Tom Brady in 2005. And I got to be around Doug a bunch, and I remember, like, I just got the distinct sense, having been around him, that he never thought that it was really his fault that he didn't become a star. He just felt like, because I'm 5'9", I never got the opportunity. If I'd gotten the opportunity, I would have become a franchise quarterback. And then you think, how many other guys are there that are just like that, right? Like that thought that were great 5'9", 5'10", 5'11" college quarterbacks. And so maybe the most interesting thing about this whole thing to me is, now we're sort of going to get to find out, because some team is going to commit to him, and some team is going to go all in on a guy who's 5'9", 5'10", in that range. And so that part of it's interesting. Obviously, you get the basketball part of it that's interesting. It's just, like I said, like I thought Baker Mayfield was about as fascinating a prospect as you could possibly get when he came out last year. And it's just amazing to think now that his backup last year might be trumping him a year later.
Albert, I still keep telling people that 5'9" and whether it was 7/8 and 5'10" and an eighth, that to me is a big difference. Seeing that 5'10" to me is a little more to like, okay, acceptable, because you do have the comp right now in the league with a Russell Wilson. Is that what you're hearing out there as well? That the 5'10" now is like, okay, we can breathe a sigh of relief, because I think it's more acceptable because there is a kind of a comparison to Russell Wilson.
Yeah, you know what? I think that coming in here, the teams are probably a little bit more interested in his weight,
Okay.
to be honest with you, Kirk. I mean, it's like 5'9" versus 5'10". I think from an optics standpoint, it does make a difference, and I'm sure quietly, even though he's not going to show it, I'm sure he's like, mentally doing a fist bump when he came in at over 5'10". But I really think that what teams were more concerned about was his bulk and his ability to carry weight. And so I think coming in at 207 was actually probably more important than coming in over 5'10". And the big reason why, at least from a perception standpoint, there's a feeling you're going to have to play him a certain way to get the most out of him. You're going to have to move him around a little bit to get the most out of him. You're going to have to take advantage of his athleticism to get the most out of him. And if you're doing that, the catch-22 is, well, he's going to have to take his hit. And then the question becomes, does he have the frame to hold up in the NFL and take those hits? I think that's an open question, because he played behind a great offensive line last year at Oklahoma against some pretty mediocre defenses in the Big 12 and didn't get hit a lot. And so that's why I think, now getting into an NFL nutrition program, an NFL strength and conditioning program, is he going to be able to play at 205, 210 versus, 185, 190, wherever he was when he was at Oklahoma. And I think being able to put on that weight in advance of the combine is a good first step to proving that he's going to be able to do that.
You can follow him on Twitter. A great follow, by the way, at Albert Breer on Twitter, senior writer for the MMQB. And Albert, my next question is this. Since Kyler Murray won't be throwing at the combine, obviously he's going to have a pro day. That pro day is on March 13th. That's also the league year starts for the NFL. So now to me, it's like some teams will kind of be showing their hand by showing up at this Oklahoma pro day instead of being in the office on the first day that now you can sign free agents. Is that a kind of you got to delegate some guys to go there, or does general manager say, you know what, I'll be here and let other guys do handle all the business?
It's an interesting way of looking at it, definitely. And I think it's not so much who's going to be there, because it's Oklahoma, so most teams are going to have someone there. It's who's making the trip, right?
Right. Who's making the trip?
If Arizona's represented by Steve Keim and Cliff Kingsbury, and the owner shows up, well, yeah, I mean, then they've got a lot of money to spend too. So if they're all showing up in force, yeah, you're paying attention to that. If Mike Mayock and John Gruden are there, you're paying attention to that. So I don't think it's so much which teams show up. I think it's who is showing up from those teams. And, certainly if you see an owner or you see a GM or you see a head coach there, I think it's fair to say that it's probably not. You're probably not there to go and look at Cody Ford. You know what I mean? Like the owner's there, you're probably there to look at Kyler Murray.
Well, the one thing I could tell you this is that there's been some awkward moments over the last couple of days. Last night, I'm watching a USC and UCLA basketball game, right? And they show a picture of Josh Rosen, who was at the game yesterday. And in the back of my mind is like, I'm not thinking of Josh Rosen, the starting quarterback of the Arizona Cardinals. I'm thinking of Josh Rosen possibly on the move at some point because of his general manager, Steve Keim, like you mentioned, not being fully committal, I should say, in those thoughts. So what's going on with this Josh Rosen dynamic? And is there a possibility that he could possibly move to a team that you used to cover in the Patriots?
I think you're thinking the right way. Now, I don't think the Cardinals know exactly what they're going to do yet.
Right.
I will say this. They took a big swing to go and get Cliff Kingsbury, right?
Right.
Unconventional move. And if you're going to do something like that, you got to be all in on the guy. And if Cliff Kingsbury comes to you and you're Steve Keim and Michael Bidwell and tells you Kyler Murray is the perfect quarterback for me, well, I think it's hard not to take him, right? Because the position's too important. And if he thinks that Kyler's the right guy, then I think you have to give your coach that. If they did get to that point, and it's still, a big if, I think what's so interesting about where Rosen could go is that there are so many teams that have like a long-term answer at the position now. I think the position's as healthy as it's been maybe in my lifetime. And so I think you got to get creative to look at where he might go. And that's why, like you mentioned the Patriots, like, well, what about the Chargers? What about the Giants? What about the Steelers? Like, could it be a team that's got an older quarterback who needs to think creatively because they're not drafting high enough to find that quarterback successor? So, the Chargers team will be like fascinating because he'd be going back to LA.
Right.
I look at I look at what the market would be for Rosen, and I think it would necessitate the Cardinals thinking a little creatively on where they want to go with it, and then maybe some teams thinking creatively not just about 2019 but about 2021, 2022. On down the line, if they need a successor to the guy who's been in place there for a long time.
Senior writer for the MMQB, Albert Breer, joining us from the Kyler Murray Invitational, better known as the NFL Scouting Combine. Albert, I know you're an Ohio State guy, so we can finally start to hear some Nick Bosa news, right? I mean, Nick Bosa's kind of been away from everything since that game against TCU early in the year. He hurts his had a abdominal muscle tear or pull, and he's out. Now he's just training for the combine. We finally get a chance to see Nick Bosa. What do you expect to see from him this weekend to kind of put him back in the status of where he's been at for the most part, which is possibly the number one overall pick in this year's draft?
Yeah, well, I talked to his dad earlier in the week, and his dad said he's been 100% for about 8 weeks.
Okay.
And really focused on his training, and right now might be further along physically than he was before he got hurt. And if you watch him play the first 3 games of the year, I mean, he's probably the best player in the country the first 3 games of the year. And so I think you expect him to put on a show here. I mean, what you've always heard is he's maybe not quite as long and as refined as Joey was coming out. But he's still, he's a student of Larry Johnson at Ohio State. He's got really good hands. He's slippery, he's explosive, and what you've always heard about him is he's just a little bit more of a powerful athlete than his brother was. And so he's going to do everything here in Indy, or at least he plans to. And so you would expect that maybe that shows up in some of the numbers that he's going to put up.
Yeah, we always know Ohio State's going to have a couple guys especially in that top half of the draft. Remember Denzel Ward last year, a Pro Bowler in his first year, drafted as high as he did from Ohio State. But speaking of that school in general, and I'm not just giving you shout out to your alma mater, but no one's talking Dwayne Haskins. It's like Kyler Murray has stolen the show, but yet is Dwayne Haskins still the top quarterback on the board, or has now Kyler Murray, with the way that he weighed, his height, is he now starting to push up past Dwayne Haskins?
Yeah, I'm not trying to cop out here, but I think it depends on who you ask. They're so different.
Right.
And, it's on one hand, you got the explosive athlete who's smaller. On the other hand, you've got the guy who's got the prototypical quarterback build,
right,
who isn't nearly as athletic as Murray, but is very, very evolved as a quarterback, especially for a guy who's only had 14 college starts, and a guy who got better over the course of the year. And so I think the biggest questions with Dwayne have to do with, is he going to get better at avoiding the rush? Is he going to become a little bit more sudden in the pocket and the way he moves around? Like, that's the sort of stuff that I think teams are going to have to ask themselves. Like, can he evolve? Can he get better? Can he get a little bit more explosive in the way that he moves around? Because everything else is there. Like, he's got a great head for the game. You saw him grow over the course of the year, which means he's taking and applying coaching. And you saw a guy who go deep into progressions and could use the full field. And so, I think if you're looking for a more traditional quarterback over someone like Kyler Murray, then you probably have Haskins rated as the best guy in the draft at that position.
A couple more minutes here with Albert Breer, the MMQB senior writer. And Albert, look, one of the questions now that's been brought up is, you have this quote unquote non-tampering period. I don't know. We know the combine, all the agents are out there. So all the teams are out there as well. Do you see any solutions possibly to a Antonio Brown, the Pittsburgh Steelers? Like, what else is being talked about out there at the combine in terms of a guy like Antonio Brown on the move?
Well, there's always lots of guys that are going to be discussed,
right?
Like, as far as trades go here, and as you know, some, I guess we call it advance work ahead of March 13th,
right?
It's going to be done, and so. I think one thing that's a little different this year is I do think there's at least potential for some big name guys to get moves, just because of the way the league's changed the last couple of years, and really the success that teams like the Eagles and the Rams have had trading. And so, it doesn't mean these guys are going to get moved, but like you'll get a spot like the receiver position that you mentioned, right? Like, so the draft class that doesn't have there's not a pure number one receiver in the draft class. There's some depth, but there may not be a great receiver in the draft class. If you look at the free agents, it's Randall Cobb and Golden Tate, older guys, and then some complementary pieces and guys like Jamison Crowder and Cole Beasley and Adam Humphries. So if you're a team that's looking for a big time number one receiver, do you call the Falcons about Julio Jones because of the contract thing? Do you call the Bengals about AJ Green because of the coaching change? Do you call the Giants about Odell Beckham? I think that those are the sorts of things that we're going to see now. And what's going to be interesting is whether or not the teams on the other side of it are willing to move those guys. But I think we're in the past, the trade market this time of the year have been driven by, let's find someone who's on the outs here or on the outs there. Now I think some of those phone calls and those conversations are happening with guys that are at the top of rosters, just because other teams have had some success building their teams that way. And, again, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not any of those guys actually get moved. But I expect those phone calls and those conversations to happen.
Well, I'll have my eyes glued to the television this weekend. Yes, I will be watching the combine, and I'll be following those tweets of one Albert Breer. I always appreciate the time, Albert.
All right, thanks, Kurt.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.